Hi, this is Maheen. I'm the founder of Maheen the Globe, which is a Seattle-based independent media company. And that's Tessa Hoyors. She is my Seattle intern, and she's also in Western Washington University junior year. Today, the discussion is about World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development. That's what May 21st is all about. So I think we have a really cool and diverse panel. I could do a round of introductions. We have Hafsa Mustafa, who's adjunct faculty, University of San Francisco. She's also a manager in Philanthropic Partnerships in Oakland. And she's also my sister, roommate for the longest time. We went to college together. And then we have Ramon Robalino, who's an economics major, energy policy minor, and he's a junior in Western Washington University. And just a quick thing about heritages and just immigrants. Like, we're all immigrants. Hafsa and I are first generation. Ramon is second generation, and Tessa is third generation. So I think it's really interesting to see that. So Ramon, I could start with you. Why don't you talk a little about your Ecuador roots from your dad's side?
Yeah, so I guess it kind of all starts with my dad immigrating originally from Ecuador and kind of traveling all over the world. His parents were able to send him to like a school in England, and that's sort of where he really got like used to English and cultures outside of Ecuador. And after that, he moved back, and since then he's been moving all around until he finally settled in America and got his citizenship later last year. And so, yeah, a lot of my experience is sort of through him, just hearing stories about his experience as an immigrant, his sort of journey from, coming here, earning citizenship, and just all the things that have come with that. And also just growing up overall in pretty diverse neighborhoods all my life, starting in downtown Seattle and Capitol Hill to moving to Tacoma, which is a historically pretty diverse city. And yeah, so it's just sort of been diversity and sort of the immigrant story my whole life. So
Got it. So just out of curiosity, what's Ecuador culture like? Tell us a little about their food and people.
yeah, so it's definitely unique. I think a lot of people try to lump all sort of Latin countries or any country south of the U.S. border into one big culture, but
Yeah.
certainly South America and Ecuador in specific is very unique, just because of the people, the geographic location. It's one of the most diverse places, not only in terms of culture, but also in terms of wildlife, just because of the Galapagos, the Andes Mountains, the Amazon rainforest. And I think the people really reflect that. You have vastly different cultures if you're talking about indigenous people who are local to the Andes region, and then you have tribes in the rainforest that are completely different from that. And then you go towards the coast and the beaches where you have the bigger, more developed cities. And there's its own culture of its own there, surrounded by like some of the food. They love seafood, ceviche,
Yes.
and overall the vibe is sort of just not taking anything too seriously. They're very open, welcoming people. They love to crack a joke. So as long as you're there and you're ready for that, it's like a really, really cool place to visit.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So now we're going to go to you. You started taking your hijab in your last year of LUMS, and I know you did face some backlash from like family and friends, etc. And you've also seen two different governments, right? During this time of your hijab in America, you saw the Obama government because you were in Chicago, Chicago at the time when his administration took over, and kind of just like facing reactions from people about person of color and someone wearing a hijab, and then with now the Trump administration. So just like your perspective as somebody who's wearing a hijab and how you're perceived in the American society.
Yeah, I think that when I first came out here, there's a lot of apprehension and a lot of folks telling me different things, and and almost like getting me to a point that they were telling me like I was going to be discriminated against or might be in danger if I don't take my job off. But I stood my ground, and my first introduction to a US was in Chicago, and it was an incredible experience because it's such a diverse city, and I was located in Hyde Park for U Chicago, and it's got a very long, rich history of the civil rights movement, and also like a really strong, vibrant African American community, and a huge Muslim community, and the Muslim community that intersects multiple identities, including the African American community, and then lots of immigrants, and across like multiple generations. So I was just really surprised that there were people so familiar with my culture and my background and what it meant, and there were people just saying like the traditional hellos on the street to me, and yeah, so it was a really great experience that way, and in terms of like experiencing that shift in like, I physically shifted from Chicago to the Bay Area in a neighborhood that wasn't very diverse, and then the administration shift happened as well, and so there was definitely a shift in terms of perception and how I experienced America. And a lot of, and there's like negatives and positives there as well, and a lot of fear. And I could see that in public places when I was in the BART system, or on the bus, or public spaces where I interacted with people. So at one hand, there was a lot of empathy and a lot of support, and on the other, there's like this fear and rejection, you know? So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Got it. So Tessa, you have Italian roots from your side, and you have Mexican roots from your dad's side. How does it build the core of you, and how has your journey been in America?
It's been pretty normal, considering that both my parents are, well, my dad is third generation and my mom is second. So they grew up here, and when my grandparents on my mom's side came from Italy and Switzerland, they wanted to raise their children like, this is America. You're American. You're not Italian American. You're not Swiss American. You're American. So they were really raised with American values. And so my parents kind of reflected that on me. But we still have cultural ties in ways. Like, my dad will make Mexican food. Tonight he's doing that. And and my mom is always making Italian food. She has some of those characteristics of an Italian mother that she just got from her mom and her dad. And she was just kind of raised that way, and she raised us kids that way. So there's something that I've learned in sociology classes about race and culture, that about the principle of third generation interest, which is usually when you're third generation like I am, you start taking an interest, you want to know your roots, and you want to know where your family's from. So I think that's a really interesting phenomenon, and something that I've definitely experienced.
Nice. So Ramon, I wanted to ask you to ask Hafsa if you have any questions about a person wearing a hijab. The intent of this panel really is to debunk any stereotypes that exist, and just curiosity, questions out of curiosity. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't say I hold really any like strong beliefs either way about someone who wears a hijab. Just personally, I've really never known anyone personally who wears a hijab, so I've never been able to ask like, what does it mean? Why do you wear it? I guess really the only assumption I really have had is, if I see someone in a hijab, I guess I'd assume that they're like at least somewhat religious, you know, because I've always seen it as like a religious thing. But I'm curious to know if there's, you know, also like an important cultural aspect to it. Like, if it's not just showing this is, you know, I'm a Muslim, I'm from X country or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think, yeah, a lot of folks have that experience out here. And I mean, a lot of people who haven't actually met someone or known someone who wears a hijab. And I'm like usually like the first person they've ever met who does. So yeah, so there are many, like, it's a very kind of layered experience. For me, it's been largely spiritual. and nobody in my family as such wore a hijab. And I kind of explored my own spirituality and my own connection to my faith, and reached the conclusion that this was my next step. And I really wanted to strengthen that aspect of my relationship. And a little did I know that, you know, this really intimate connection between me and the divine, and this, and just like an extra piece of cloth, would have such consequences, you know, social and political. And it's like
Right.
suddenly it's like public domain and discussion, and you know, people who've known me all my life are asking me strange questions, you know.
Including me.
So, yeah, so it's kind of threw me in a space where I really wasn't prepared, because I started like really young, and so I was unprepared to grapple all of those questions. And coming out here too, I realized that what it's become a symbol of it's kind of become a symbol of political resistance, you know. So it's like, oh, you know, um, uh, in an environment that may not be embracing, you know, diversity or embracing my culture, like here I am, you know. And to be visible and to have connections like these are really important to kind of counter the mainstream myth that rarely showcases the truth about our people. And also, like, that's very singular idea of like person wearing a hijab has to be brown and from a certain region of the world. And it's like, well, Muslims have multiple identities and multiple ethnicities and all over the world, and you know, in different places. And so just understanding the complexity of that identity, and also understanding that that's, you know, there are multiple ways of how it shows up. And it definitely has a cultural piece as well, because back in my country, a lot of people like on the streets would just wear like a piece of cloth, and that's just part of our the way we our national you know, national clothes, for example. Like, you know, we always have an extra piece of cloth on our head or covering ourselves, and that's that in a lot of cases not connected to faith, and it's just the way of life. So yeah, it's a very complex relationship that's often distilled in a very kind of singular, reductive way that doesn't really represent the beauty of the practice.
Gotcha.
Cool. I hope that answered your question, Ramon. And
Yeah,
so I
definitely.
wanted to kind of transition into, so it's interesting. So Hafsa and I were in college together, and we were roommates, and she's literally the most open-minded person I know. And we have different set of beliefs. So I'm someone who also wears dresses, and she doesn't, but she's never judged me for it. And I feel terrible because I totally judged her when she started taking the hijab, and I was really against it. And so you know, like it was an interesting thing. But even when she talks about Pakistan, so wanted to kind of tell you guys, there's a spectrum of people. You'll have people who wear hijab, then you'll have people who don't wear hijab. You'll find atheists, agnostics, lesbians, gays, you know, it's all of that. And I feel like it's not talked about in the open just because the way media is. And so no one really gets a true depiction of what Pakistan is. And it's extremely diverse in terms of, you know, faith and sexuality and all that kind of stuff. Moving on from this, I wanted to talk about this other thing about, like, so Tessa was mentioning that, you know, some people that she knows think that people who take a hijab are actually suppressed and they've been forced to take a hijab. And so I was telling her, and Hafsa, you can help me answering that as well, is that I know some people who were taking a hijab because they were pressured from their parents to take it. But once they got empowered, i.e. that they went to college or they got married, they took it off and they went totally the other way. You know, they would party and go clubbing and all that kind of stuff. And that was truly who they were. So Hafsa, what would you say to that? I think you have a few friends like that too, maybe?
Yeah. And on both sides, I remember as soon as we went to college, a lot of changes happened. And I felt like there were people like me who, like, my purpose of like starting in college, it was very designed and deliberate, because I kind of tried it at home and I wasn't able to do it because there's so much stigma and social pressure against it. And it's of course like grounded in the political context of what it means to wear something like this, and how like this piece of cloth has been politicized or weaponized by different political parties. And so I feel like that is all separate from my faith and my connection. And so when I went to college, like I was like, oh, great, like I'm free from, I live in my own world now. I'm an emerging adult. And when you're cut off from your past life in that way, you're able to make more like independent decisions. And so a lot of friends like do both, you know, like one, that those who were kind of forced into it or never questioned it and just inherited those beliefs and practices from their families, like questioned it and kind of went their own way. And others who were like me, who were like, well, actually that's how I want to express my spirituality, and felt the freedom to do so at that time, you know. So there's like a spectrum of like experiences that I kind of witnessed, and that's true. It happened.
All right, so now I want to shift our focus on just diversity in our neighborhoods and where we live. So, Ramon, I could start with you. You can tell me a little about Tacoma. How is the feel of the neighborhood, and you know, what's the food like, what's the culture like, and also talk a little about the diversity there.
Yeah, totally. I think there's so many places to start if you want to talk about some of the diversity in the neighborhood I live in. I guess I've lived here most of my life, so I've always kind of just taken it for granted, I guess. And it didn't really occur to me just like what diversity looked like and what it felt like in a neighborhood until I moved away to college, which is, I guess you could say, less diverse, certainly. I know Tessa could back me up on that. But going back to just the neighborhood, it's historically been a really diverse neighborhood, historically majority African American, I want to say. But nowadays it's definitely diversified. There's about equal proportions, you could say, of like white and African American. There's a big Hispanic population, and then there's a growing Asian Pacific Islander population as well. So sort of like a big melting pot of a whole bunch of different cultures.
Yeah.
And the food really reflects that as well. Just you walk a couple blocks from my house and it's like MLK Boulevard, and there's just like a whole bunch of different types of restaurants you could take your pick from. There's a Vietnamese restaurant my dad's actually making an art piece for right now that we love. Next door there's like I think it's Thai food, and then you walk down a little further, there's like historically black owned restaurants. There's even like it's like a, I want to say Caribbean sort of restaurant that serves like all vegan food, and it's so like my mom loves that place. And so yeah, the food is really good, which is probably the thing I miss the most. But like I was saying, yeah, it's just really diverse, and it's something I really took, you know, for granted, especially when I was in middle school and high school. I just had like a group of friends, and a lot of them just were of different backgrounds, and it was like kind of weird, you know, going away from that, where it's like, you know, meeting people and they all kind of have a similar story, similar background. It's not really like a vast sort of different surrounding, I guess. So yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I kind of grew up in it, so I love it, but it's definitely something you notice a lot more when it's sort of like taken out of your world.
Got it. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Fremont. So I've been living here for almost 2 years, and it was definitely an adjustment to get into semi-suburban life, because I was in downtown heart of it for like 6 years. But it's very like hippie-ish. They're big on coffee culture, lots of different coffee spots. They're big on with music. So lots of like different bars playing music and things like that. In terms of food, I see a mix of like Mexican, Asian, Thai, Vietnamese, Japanese, and a lot of focus on like salads as well. So that's, I think, kind of interesting. What about Bellingham, Tessa? What's Bellingham like?
Bellingham isn't the most diverse place I've ever been. Especially at Western, we have some ethnic student programs and stuff like that, but the population of ethnic students on campus is very, very minute compared to the rest of the population on campus. And yeah, and also the food, like Bellingham is not the place to go for food. There are a couple local restaurants that are good, and we, you know, Ramon and I usually go out because we're roommates, and we'll have like a monthly dinner, like we'll go out to a restaurant, and it's a really difficult process trying to find a place to eat. So we're like, okay, let's just go to this Italian place, I guess, that we've been to like 20 times already, because the selection in downtown Bellingham isn't very good, and I think that has to do with like a lack of diversity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I feel like when from downtown is the most diverse there is, right? Seattle downtown. And as you go further and further away, the diversity aspect kind of goes away. I think that's interesting. How is Newark, California, the Bay Area, Hafsa?
Yeah, I think the Bay Area is interesting because you can see like it's very, like you said, away from the downtown, the culture kind of changes, but it's very kind of segregated in a way because there are neighborhoods that are like very affluent and they're usually like very white, and then there are neighborhoods that are diverse, and then there's like the suburbs. So there is like, it kind of correlates to the kind of food and the kind of people you have. And I'm really lucky to be in a neighborhood that's got a lot of like South Asian community, a lot of Muslim community. There's sometimes like billboards that have like stuff written in Urdu, which is my language, or in Hindi. And you can find halal foods or all the ingredients we need to make our traditional foods. And then there's also like halal Chinese and halal like Mexican food. So it's like, oh, I can actually eat like, other cuisines, like meats and other cuisines. And so it feels like such a privilege to be in that kind of a
Hafsa and I joke about this, that it's like mini Pakistan. And I tell her she's so lucky that she has so many like good Pakistani food options, because in Seattle, I was telling Tessa this morning, I think, that we don't have that many like Pakistani food options. So if I crave something, I actually cook it. And we actually did a food blogger, Pakistan Eats, Mariam Jalani's a piece that Tessa worked on today, and it made me so hungry. I want to have Pakistani food right now. So, all right, so let's just move into this discussion of how you guys are feeling during this pandemic. So me and my sister Hafsa, so we talk at least 5-6 times a day, just trying to feel more connected with the people that we love and care about. And so Tessa, how is it for you and Ramon? You both are going out. How has the separation been?
Terrible. Terrible.
Yeah.
I miss him so much, and I miss our friends, and I just miss being, there's a certain connection you feel when you're in person as opposed to over video or like FaceTime or something like that, because we FaceTime like every single day for a couple hours at least.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little about Western Washington's culture, and you both are going to Western Washington and can give a good perspective on like what the culture is like and the diversity aspect too. Ramon, I can start with you.
Sure. I feel like I kind of wear that fact on my on my sleeve, just because I've always been sort of like the stereotypical West Coaster, like laid back, pretty easygoing. And it's kind of funny because it definitely contrasts with a lot of like my dad's personality and a lot of sort of what he's taken from his experience in Ecuador and in Latin American countries, because there's definitely a lot more of that like type A personality out there, or at least it's promoted, and that's sort of like the norm or the ideal. So definitely being more outspoken is sort of like expected. And so I always thought it was pretty interesting contrasting that with like, how I've grown up. And despite the fact that he's my dad and I've spent like my whole life with him, you can't help but absorb sort of just the general atmosphere outside as well.
Yeah.
And I think that besides just being, seen as more laid back and easygoing, it's definitely interesting because there's pockets, especially in Washington and the Pacific Northwest, where there's a lot of diversity, but then you can just go miles and miles and it seems like it's just nothing but like majority white suburbs, and you might have a chunk of maybe some East Asian immigrants who have come over and made a good living or something like that. But yeah, I think it's interesting. It's not so much like you think of every pocket having some sort of diversity. It's definitely select areas, and then you can go through like farmland or you go through suburbs where it's very, very much the opposite.
Got it. Tessa, what would you like to add?
I mean, yeah, you pretty much described it pretty well. My parents' house, where I'm at right now, I'm not in Bellingham, but at my parents' house, there's like little to no diversity. My dad is one of the only people of color in the neighborhood, and even at the high school I went to, it was kind of diverse, but at the same time it wasn't, mostly because we had white people and Asian people and couple Mexicans, couple African Americans sprinkled in here and there, but it was really not that diverse. So you really didn't get the cultural background of a lot of, you weren't really culturally, I don't want to say like educated, but you haven't experienced a lot of different cultures. And yeah, I feel like the more you go up Western Washington, like the more you drive up I-5, the less diverse it gets.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hafsa,
and
how was it like in Chicago? I know you were in college a while back, but how would you, if you try to remember?
It was such an incredible experience because it has, like I said, such a incredible history of the civil rights movement, and um, and a very vibrant like African American community and people who've been living there for a while. So like multi-generational businesses owned by families. And so that in itself like has a different feel to it. But things were shifting when I was moving there, when I was like in the process of moving out. There were like these larger like real estate like Mongols who were like buying pieces of land and then converting into like yuppie like establishments, and like trendy places, but then like kind of taking that away from like the historical like um well, the multi-generational folks that own those spaces were just like kind of going squeezed or pushed out of the neighborhood. And
Okay.
so that's kind of what we see, that gentrification all over, in a lot of like main spaces where land and culture is kind of eliminated because of capitalism, really.
Yeah. Well, we're wrapping up here and we can just do like a quick round of afterthoughts. And Hafsa, do you miss me as a sister?
Oh yeah, of course. I just can't wait till the travel restrictions are over and COVID's over, and I'll just like run to
I
Seattle.
feel
The
like I
longest.
talk to her like 4 times a day. She's like my therapist. And also her attachment with my daughter, Maha, it's pretty unique and incredible. Any afterthoughts, Ramon?
Yeah, no, I can echo those sentiments definitely. I'm excited for when things are finally starting to sort of go back to normal. I like had to celebrate my 21st birthday like about a week ago in
Yeah.
quarantine, so I'm excited for being able to actually go out and probably have a few drinks with Tessa and some friends actually out in
Nice.
the bars, and not have to sit here with my parents and feel weird about drinking a beer in front of them or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Tessa.
Yeah, I really don't want to be here anymore. I want to go out and I want to, go places, travel, experience different things. And, it's just really hard being stuck in the same place. And we had a Zoom birthday party for Ramon on
Sweet.
Friday.
That's cool.
And yeah, but it wasn't the same as actually being there with all the people you really care about and
Mhm.
just being there in person. It just didn't feel the same. Like, yeah, it was still special, but just didn't feel the same.
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling with it too. I mean, I have my moments of being an introvert and extrovert, and I feel like my moment of introvert is gone, and I just want to be with people. So yeah, it's been weird, but thank you so much, guys. This was incredible. I hope you all got to learn a little about each other, and thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for organizing. This was awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks for having me.
Of course. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.